Good morning, everybody. Good morning to our viewers in India, and good evening to our viewers in the US. And welcome to another round of dtalks, disruptive talks on literacy. And we have with us today a very special guest, Mr. Anthony Tassi. Welcome to the show, sir. It is such a pleasure to have you over. And today, Mr. Tassi is going to be speaking on what is literacy and helping parents to create the future. And something more about our guest. Anthony Tassi is a CEO of Literacy Partners, an adult literacy program based in New York City, and the founder of La Fuerza da Familia Latina, a parent education program throughout the United States. Prior to joining Literacy Partners in 2013, Anthony was an advisor to the New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg in the areas of education and health policy. Anthony is Emmy Award creator of educational television, including La Fuerza di Carrera, with its community educational campaign, and We Speak NYC, a series that migrant New Yorkers have watched to improve their English skills while learning more about their new home. Wow. Anthony lives in New York with his wife and 13-year-old daughter, who have been his primary teachers in adult life. It's so amazing, Anthony, to have you with us today. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Anupama. It's really lovely to be with you and all the guests here today. I'm a big fan of your work. You've created a
Thank
methodology
you.
for literacy that is very compelling, that seems very effective, and you have identified such a pressing need in so many nations of the world to improve literacy, to do so at a scale that is meaningful across societies, and to do so rapidly, which is a very admirable combination of strengths. So thank you so much for inviting me here this morning to chat with you and your viewers. As you say, I am working in the field of adult literacy here in New York City. My organization is called Literacy Partners, and Literacy Partners is a small NGO, and we have been working on adult literacy in New York City for nearly 50 years now, and we have recently spread to other cities in the United States using media, which I want to talk about a little bit this morning. But I wanted to start with a little bit more of an overview of my organization. So if we could move to the next slide. What I'd like to tell you, our tagline here is empowering families through literacy education. And we seek to have long-term social impact by focusing on parents. And we believe parents are the great lever of social change in the United States and most likely in every other society as well. Parents have very unique and important, we'll stay on the first slide just for a minute, have a very unique and important role in thinking about the future. We wake up every morning and we think about how we can create a better future for our children. And so we are built-in advocates. We are by nature revolutionaries in some sense of striving to make the world a better place for our children. And when we have a broader view, that encompasses changing the world for everyone around it so that our children can thrive. And our specific theory of change then for this social impact is to address today's most pressing problem among adults, the education of adults, by building their capacity in literacy and also in the language skills of migrants in the United States in particular, so that they may be able to solve their problems and achieve their goals, be those goals related to employment or further education or goals related to healthcare or civil society, what have you. All of the various things that we use our literacy skills for and our language skills for, but also fundamental to the identity of parent is to improve their children's outcomes. And so the adult who is a parent, you can address today's problem of adult illiteracy today, and you can also equip them with the resources to prevent the problem from being transmitted to their children. So you'll improve child outcomes. Children who grow up with a stronger foundation in literacy, who grow up with more resiliency in their home, who grow up with parents who are more responsive and more emotionally nurturing, then have better outcomes as adults. And so the cycle is a virtuous circle, I guess you would say, 2 generations impacted at the same time through serving one parent. So you can move to the next slide. And we like to say at here in my NGO that parents come to our program, Literacy Partners, to transform their lives, right? They are looking to improve their lives through acquiring more literacy and more English language skills. And they want to create that brighter future for their children. And they do so through, they do both of these things. They accomplish both of these goals through the power of literacy. So we can move to the next slide. And our program, just to give you some context, has 4 components. We have an English program for immigrant parents, and our view of education is a mix of content and skills blended together. And here in our context, we have figured out to emphasize basic English communication, the communicative skills, with themes around child development and parenting to address that primary motivation that parents come with, and also health literacy. And this is, of course, a long-standing need and priority for lower income populations, migrant populations, what have you. But certainly during the COVID era, ever more important that individuals have the skills to access healthcare information, process it, make use of it, navigate their way through the systems to not only get their COVID vaccines, but also take care of all of their other family health requirements. So that is our approach to English classes, is these 3 components together. We also have a reading for adults, our traditional adult literacy program, a one-on-one tutoring for new readers. And in our context, these are when we say new readers or absolute beginners, these would be adults that read below the kindergarten standard or the pre-kindergarten standard, that are working on the identifying of letters and sounds and what have you. And we also have a program at the opposite end of the literacy spectrum for young moms who have had their education interrupted by having families. And we have a program that helps them attain a secondary school degree where they were on track to do so before they started their family, and helps them transition into university. And we do so at the same time while we help them become the mothers that they desire to be. And so we build their parenting skills at the same time as we build their academic and their so-called non-cognitive skills, their social emotional learning skills that will ultimately predict their success in university as lifelong learners. And we find these are 2 sides to the same coin. As young women, as they feel accomplished in their own right as scholars, they then approach their children from a different vantage point, a vantage point of having success in academics, having more hope in the future. And as they interact with their children in new ways and have deeper and more nurturing and more satisfying relationships with their children, they are motivated to achieve more for themselves academically. So it's, again, a virtuous circle in that program. And the last program we operate is a program of early childhood literacy promotion with Spanish-speaking families. And that program, as you mentioned at the top, is La Fuerza de Familias Latinas, the power of Latina families. Latinas make up the largest migrant group in the United States, from Mexico, from the Dominican Republic, from other nations in Central and South America. And we have a partnership with the Univision television network, where we have created a short-run telenovela. And this telenovela deals with social issues of parents and children and the drama of family relationships, and the desire of these parents to improve their families, improve and make their families more harmonious, and also to address the early learning issues of the children. And so we have a community engagement campaign where we bring the moms together to reflect on this telenovela and to identify things that they can do inspired by the action of the characters. Now, I'll speak a little bit more about this in a minute. But these are the 4 programs, just for background context, that we're operating. If we could move to the next slide. So I wanted to chat with you this morning about the issue of literacy and share some thoughts that I think may be familiar to many of you, may be new for some, but there's some ideas about why I personally am very excited about working in adult literacy. I previously worked in health policy in New York City in the domestic United States context, and I found that literacy was a shorter bridge to social justice than healthcare and access to healthcare was. And so for me, I really enjoy this field because you can work on the level of the individual and have impact on the entire society at the same time. And the way we do this is through an understanding of what literacy is. And so for me, this is my understanding. You may have a different understanding, and I would love to hear about it and compare notes with everyone here. And from my understanding, there are really 5 steps to what we would call literacy. The first is your basic decoding, looking at the symbols, the printed symbols that we call letters or the alphabet, and decoding, matching the sound with the symbol, and being able to replicate that sound and symbol combination, decoding across all of the letters or all of the phonemes in the language. The second step from there, of course, is vocabulary, is identifying and understanding words, and understanding that words are formed by the combination of these symbols, the combination of the phonemic elements together. And that understanding of words we call vocabulary, which is the second step. From vocabulary, then after you can read a letter and you can read a word, then comes fluency, your ability to read multiple words at the same time into sentences. And from fluency, the next step is really comprehension. So it is lovely that one can read a pamphlet. The question then is, do you understand the pamphlet? Do you understand the text? Is there comprehension? And that is the 4th step of what literacy is. And the 5th one, of course, is, can you use this text? Can you use this language? Can you use this meaning to advance your life in some way, large or small? So for me, these are the 5 steps of literacy. This is what our program really looks at when we think about teaching adults. But what I like about this framework, and again, there are other frameworks to think about what literacy is that it also maps very neatly to social literacy. So if we think about the challenge of creating societies that are more just, societies that are more equitable, societies that are free from oppression of every kind, we can think about these same 5 steps, right? As workers in the social arena, first of decoding, what is this issue I see in front of me? I need to decode it. I need to figure out what exactly it is. And then I need to be able to name it. And I need to be able to join it together with the context that surrounds these individual issues of social dominations and oppressions, social inequities. Once we have defined and can name them, can we understand the longer context? Are we fluent in the causes and the consequences of these social policies? And can we really understand how this dynamic, how these inequities function in our society? And can we understand what the remedies might really be? And then the use is, can we organize, right? Can we organize, and can we put this understanding into practice? Do we have the political will? Do we have the collective intelligence and the collective force to bring about social change? So I like, for me, I like this symbiosis between the individual and the family, and the same methodology that we would use is the methodology that understands the changing of society. And of course, many of you may recognize the work of Paulo Freire and other great leaders in the field of literacy who have come before me. And we have been heavily influenced, of course, by their work. Can we go to the next slide? Now, I would say that in our context, for my NGO in New York, when we talk about the education of adults, we're fundamentally talking about trauma. And our understanding is that learning is a universal phenomenon that happens across all members of society at all times in an organic fashion, natural fashion. There's very little you need to do to enable people to learn. And I think the work of your organization, the Global Dream, illustrates that quite clearly. But this natural learning process gets interrupted and interfered with by trauma. And trauma can have a capital T, a very big trauma, or it can have a small t, of the everyday ways that people have gotten hurt and have not had a chance to heal from those hurts. And those hurts interfere with our innate ability to learn. And so when we serve adults, we understand that what we are fundamentally dealing with is trauma. And we understand that trauma, the way that trauma is not evenly distributed across our society. It is socially distributed, and that distribution is called oppression. So some members of society are subjected to more trauma on a more regular basis with fewer opportunities to heal from those traumas. And we call that maldistribution of trauma oppression, be it the oppression of racism or the caste system or sexism or any number of oppressions, the oppression migrants face in new countries, et cetera. And in recognizing that the education of adults is first and foremost addressing trauma, we have learned from others and developed within our own practice a notion of 6 C's, as we call them in our English operating system, that are the keys to unlocking resiliency in students of any age, but certainly ones that we have applied in working with adults, with parents. And the first C is competence. Resiliency and is driven by a sense of accomplishment in the first step. And so we really look to the competence in specific skills, be they speaking English, or be they reading, or be they something else in the workforce arena, the employment arena. And related to competence is confidence. People have a skill, but do they have the wherewithal to apply the skill? And lack of confidence is not. We don't view lack of confidence as a personal attribute. We don't say this student is confident and this student is not confident. We actually understand it as a social phenomenon. And so we try to address it in a very, not in a personal way, but in a systemic way, in trying to build the confidence. But the confidence is essential for the competence to shine through and to be applied. The next area is really connections. Humans are inherently connected to one another. Across every society, we have examples of children thriving and growing healthier to the extent that they have more vibrant connections with their family members and with other members of their community. And so what we seek to do is produce a program of education that is rooted in building connections for students, connections among each other, connections with their tutor or their teacher, connections with their children, first and foremost in this work, and building a supportive community. And in this sense, our understanding of education and our understanding of teaching and working with people who have been traumatized is what you might call an ecological model, that no individual develops or learns in isolation. We do so in relation to other people, in relation to our environment, in relation to the media, in relation to our religions, what have you. And so we really do take many steps very intentionally to build these connections and build this community around the learners. And the next phase of resiliency is really critical thinking. Again, from critical thinking on two levels, I would say. One level is on understanding of the self, and really understanding yourself as a learner, and understanding your story as a learner, and what has helped you and what has hindered you as a learner, and recognizing that you are the subject of your story, not the object of somebody else's story, right? And having what we call agency over your own story, and that critical thinking that you can begin to see yourself as an actor, as an agent of change, as a subject of your own story. The second way we think about critical thinking is a little bit from a healthcare perspective, a health dynamic of moving from a curative approach of we're treating some symptoms to a preventative approach, right? And so having an analysis of the world, having an analysis of your family, and being able to think critically about the future, think critically about text that you encounter, thinking critically. And ultimately, this is one of the massive challenges of every democracy these days, is thinking critically about information that we are subjected to. The next phase is really a very exciting and very dynamic phase of education, which is structuring opportunities for contribution. We have found, again, just inherently, that every learner has some innate desire, some innate skill to make a contribution. And this skill and this desire may be covered up for the time being, the learner may not even be aware of it yet. The teacher may not be aware of it, but over time, we feel like the desire to contribute, the attitude and the decision and the skills to take leadership are, of course, universal, and that effective education is one that can nurture those leadership skills and harvest them for the good of the group and for the good of the family in particular. And this word leadership means many things to many people. For us, we think of the word leadership as an ability, again, a universal ability, but also a decision to take responsibility for things going well for yourself and for those around you, right? And we define it in that way because it captures the universal leadership of parents who have made a decision to make things go well for people around them, their children primarily, and it also understands that no one's leadership is more important than another's. You've just decided to make sure things go well for people around you. Are you a small leader or a big leader? Yes, that's a question. How many people have you made that decision for? But many people, when you think about literacy, when you think about leadership, they don't see themselves in that word because they're not a mayor, or they're not a member of parliament, they're not a CEO. But leadership is not about a title or a rank in society. It is about fundamentally a decision, and then a set of skills that you can nurture and develop, and a set of actions you take so that things go well around you. And what we have found, student after student, year after year, is that leadership is a very important part of education. It's a very important part of students now taking charge of our program, of our NGO, of their learning, of their world, and exercising leadership. And again, this is the domain in which social change becomes more apparent, is when individuals are really supported to claim their own inherent leadership and have a supportive community to build the leadership skills. And the last thing I would say, again, very important, is this issue of cultural validation. And our program is, what we would call cross-cultural. We deal with many migrants from many different countries, so we have this very obvious situation of cross-cultural context. But also with those of us who were born and raised in the United States and are native English speakers, we also have cross-cultural encounters with other students that have the same background, but are from a different racial or ethnic group, of course. And the recognizing, acknowledging, and validating of one's culture is of paramount importance, and recognizing where there is discordance or different cultures at play in the tutoring relationship, in the educational relationship, always making sure that the instructors and the tutors are validating and putting the students' culture first, and trying to do this work on the terrain and in the terms that are most familiar to the student and their culture. And we've realized this over time because the oppression that our students face is transmitted to them through the culture, and there is a invalidation of non-dominant cultures in the United States, as anyone who has paid attention to the news from the US knows quite well, and knows from the United States' role in the rest of the world. There's the dominant culture in the United States has very often invalidated and suppressed and oppressed and erased the cultures of other peoples. And this, of course, creates a massive trauma. And so one of the ways of dealing with that is helping people to reclaim their culture and to reclaim a pride they have in their heritage. And that's a stance that makes learning go better, I think. So those are the 6 C's, and that's what we like to call them, of effective education. These are really what we might think of as resiliency, elements of resiliency that trigger and activate individuals' inherent desire and capacity to learn. And these elements address our learners who have been diagnosed with a so-called learning disability, or have so-called different learning styles than are recognized and appreciated in mainstream education. So I wanted to share that perspective of how we're doing our work, and wonder if it resonates with you and the work that you are doing. And I wanted to I wanted to tell you one more short story, and then we can move to conversation and questions and answers. If you could move to the next slide, that would be great. So I think one of the most exciting methodology for large-scale literacy, large-scale literacy campaigns, and campaigns that move from basic literacy to intermediate and to advanced literacy, is the use of media. And India, of course, is a very fertile ground for this work, and we've learned much from the work of social impact television and filmmakers throughout a very noble and informative history. Mexico is another country that has done a lot of this work, and so it's an area where we in the United States are really able to learn so much from our sisters and brothers in other societies who have done this work that we've learned so much from and are now able to apply in our own context. And the work in media in our context, lends itself to what we call the story, voice, action methodology. And so the first is, and this is work we do with parents again, but the first phase is really the story. And so in our work, we have worked with Univision, Televisa Univision from Mexico, to create a short-run telenovela, a television show, a melodrama that has stories about families. And so we bring parents together to watch these stories. And these stories, there are 5 episodes that are an hour long. You can watch them that long, but you can also watch short scenes that tell a story. The important point is to have a story. Again, we like to think about content and skills together. And in this approach, the content comes first. The narrative, the story is the starting point. And so it's a very simple methodology of people watch the videos together, and then they have voice. They talk about what they have seen. Who is the character who does this character remind you of in your own life? Why do you think she did that with her daughter? What do you think is going to happen next? This is a kind of a visual literacy. It's a dialogic. It has a lot of in common with dialogic reading, of interacting with the text. But here we have a very familiar and very comfortable form for the narrative for individuals with low literacy, and that's television. So we use video for that purpose. And the voice aspect, of course, is critically important because, again, learners who have been targeted by oppression, and in the U.S. context, that again we understand that we're dealing first with trauma, and trauma is the result of oppression, and so that what is common in all the students that we work with is that their voices have not been validated in our society. Their voices have not been heard. They haven't had a chance to tell their stories. So we create this space where people get a chance to tell their story. They have a chance to have voice, and it doesn't need to be a big platform for a long speech like the one that I'm delivering now. This is conversation, and as a cultural form, watching a novella and chatting about the characters is a very familiar mode of social interaction, especially for our Latina students from Mexico, South America, Dominican Republic, etc. And from voice, from a community analysis that starts with what I think and is joined together what other people think together, out of that sort of social analysis of a text, of a story, of a video, comes action, where we get to think together about, given that analysis, what are things we can do at home with our children that would make a difference. So these stories in particular are about the relationship of parents and adult family members with their children, and the interactions that the parents can have with the children that reliably lead to the children's social emotional development, the children's early language development, early literacy development, pre-reading skills, as it were, and some literacy skills. So those are the stories that we then talk about with our voice, and then we decide for ourselves what is the actions that we've seen modeled in the story. What are the actions that we can take? What are those interactions with our children that we can bring at home? So that on the screen, you see that in our novella, there's a scene in the kitchen where a young girl is helping her aunt make pupusas. Pupusa is a famous dish throughout Latin America. Every family has their own way of making it and has their own tradition around this food. And in particular, we've frozen this little picture on the aunt saying cuatro tasse, 4 cups of flour, of masa. And the girl is now counting it out, 1, 2, 3. And again, this is math in the context of culture, which is food, right? So that's modeled for people. They get to tell a story. They get to have their voice and tell their story. And then they decide what to do at home tonight. So they feel inspired. They feel connected. And sure enough, this participant, the the father with the hat on is now arranging some food and measuring food with his son at home. So we like this methodology of story, voice, action. Again, having the some what you might call advanced literacy skills modeled for people. We find the didactic approach of telling people is much less effective than showing people. And of course, having a character who the audience can relate to, who can see themselves in that action, is very, very helpful. So this, of course, is the basic theory of making a movie, right? And hooking your audience in a drama. And we are leveraging that theory, that methodology for the social purpose, of course. And it's interesting, once you see that this methodology is a very powerful social learning methodology, as Miguel Sabido called it, and Albert Bandura referred to it, social learning. You wonder why every filmmaker in Bollywood, in Hollywood, and everywhere else, why don't they use this for? Why don't they make movies for? Why isn't every movie for social impact? Why are we having entertainment fantasies that have no social value when it's so conceptually it's so clear and so easy to create value in this way? So that concludes my talk. Thank you for bearing with me as I worked through the elements that I find very exciting of literacy as a strategy for both individuals and families and for changing society. Some reflections I've shared about how we consider the role of trauma and addressing trauma very explicitly through our intentions as an NGO, and this one example of a broader methodology to use media to reach a larger audience than we can do through in-person and one-on-one instruction. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It was so enlightening to hear your views on how the 6Cs can help and what literacy really means in the real sense. It was really, really amazing. So we go on to the question answer session now. And here I would like to start with what has been your inspiration behind your work in the field of literacy?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I got into the field of literacy actually through the field of healthcare. That was the field, that was the social issue I was most motivated to work on. And I had a job in the mayor's office of New York City, and we were doing outreach to find individuals who did not have health insurance and who needed primary care. And so I had a very small role to go to adult literacy programs in the city of New York. We thought that might be a good place to find people who didn't have access to primary care. And I knew nothing about literacy at this point in my life, in my career. But I found these programs, and sure enough, most literacy students did not have good access to a regular doctor, could not afford healthcare. But more importantly, I discovered a community of practitioners who were frontline social justice workers in the literacy teachers. And I discovered for myself that all that we were trying to accomplish in the field of health, they were trying to accomplish in the field of education. But the difference is that health, in our context, in the healthcare system, is a service that is curative and preventative, but literacy is a service that is generative, that is a skill that people can build upon to do many other things. And so for me, I realized that we could improve the health of the population of New York City more, I thought, by investing in literacy than we could by making more incremental improvements in health. that as people's literacy skills improve, their education advances, their health automatically rises with it. The same is not true for health. As their health improves, your education does not necessarily. It can. Poor health can be an impediment, but improving the health doesn't necessarily improve your education. Whereas in literacy, there's a very straight line in terms of health, the relation to health outcomes. So for me, I was very motivated by this idea that literacy was a shorter bridge to social justice than other fields that I was exposed to. And later, when I had my daughter and I got reacquainted with the power of the power and the extraordinary learning of children, when I had my inner child was reawakened, I really got excited about the role of parents in particular, and the ability for us to be an ally to children in our care, be an ally to that child in a way that unlocks a very powerful dynamic in our relationship. And so that's what really got me excited about parent literacy, literacy for parents in particular.
Very, very beautifully put. And I think the way you put it in your presentation also, that how trauma builds up resilience and how to counter resilience, literacy has a major role to play, and how things are connected from one to another is so amazing. Yes. How are creativity and innovative thinking used on a daily basis in the classroom?
Yes, thank you for that question. In our context, the innovation, I think of the innovation first as a question for my workforce of teachers and tutors and managers. I want them to be constantly pushing their own thinking and constantly trying new ideas and new things. And so and in fact, we recently learned of your literacy methodology, and so this will be an innovation in our program. Now we will be trying out your particular approach, and we'll be innovating and seeing how it works in our context and trying to improve our services. And so I think this is the nature of human growth, is to innovate and to try, make mistakes, and we learn from mistakes and to move forward. And I want my team to model that mindset, if you will, the so-called growth mindset, right, of innovation. We want to model that for our peers, but also for our students as well. And none of those 6 C's apply to our students. They apply to us as well, first and foremost, because they apply to all humans. So we don't have a prescription for our students that we wouldn't take for ourselves, because we are all part of the same family of people. And so I think that's when you mention innovation, that's what comes to my mind. And creativity, of course, is the spark of the human condition. And we want to enable it in all ways that we can. And we find different kinds of opportunities to hear student voice throughout our engagement, throughout the time we have with students, and to celebrate their creativity in ways that are very small and ways that are actually quite significant. And then, of course, our work in media is really rooted in that creativity as well.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for answering that. Uh, what are the most common instructional or literacy strategies a parent must use?
Yeah, I think that for me, and I know you're quite expert in this, I also could imagine our audience here would have many answers to this question. And the way that I would answer it is that the primary strength that the parent brings to the education process for their child is their love and attention. And their responsiveness and the parent's ability to, in some ways, follow the lead of the child, to give the child's mind a space to wander and to try, and to and the parent's ability to follow, and the parent's ability to respond to the cues of the child. As an infant, that's actually vitally important, to be responsive to the cues and to provide nurturance. And I think that these elements of connection, having a solid, consistent, and loving and supportive bond, is the foundation of all learning, right? And so, in my sense, I don't. I think the parent doesn't need to be a teacher, an explicit teacher with pedagogical strategies. I think the parent's role is much more powerful, to be the agent of love, the agent of attention, to pay attention. You know, we in English we say pay as if it's money, right? To pay attention. That's how valuable the attention really is. And I feel like that's the parent's strength, great skill, and unique role in education. There are many other teachers out there, but this form of teaching is the primary, the base upon which everything else is built.
Yeah. Pay attention, and also the role of the parent maybe would be of a mentor, and let the child be, like, so that there is no resilience, there is no trauma, and the child can express himself, and the parent is always there to at the back end to support the child,
Yes,
which is
well said. Yes.
yeah. What challenges have you faced in your mission during the time of COVID?
Oh, you name it. We've 1,000 challenges as an NGO. You know, we were doing face-to-face in-person instruction for 47 years, and we were not doing. We had a media division, but we were primarily a classroom, and so we had to change that, and we had to find the appropriate level of technology for our students. So we couldn't. There, we have colleagues that have very sophisticated platforms, digital learning platforms, where you create an account and there's analytics and tracking, but our students can't do that. So we have to find an appropriate level that keeps the learning at the center, doesn't make the technology at the center, and that's the formula that we've figured out and is useful for us. As an NGO, we had a big crisis in funding. We derive a lot of our funding from a big dinner that we host.
Yeah.
We have a big community dinner. People buy a ticket. They give money in the dinner because they're so inspired. We can't have a dinner for 2 years. So we had a big crisis in funding. Many of our other funders in our social sector, two things really happened. One is they thought COVID is a huge, we're going to put our money into COVID. We're not going to put our money into, we're going to pause on education. We're going to put our money into COVID relief, food and excuse me, PPP, masks and medicine and vaccine. And so we saw a shift in our funders away from education towards relief, direct relief. And then the second shift in funders was a belief that digital education is not effective. And so they would also wait until everybody came back to in-person instruction. And so these were big challenges that we had to confront just to have the resources to continue our work. And what we had, I showed a slide at the beginning. We had 4 programs. So we used to have 7, and we suspended 4 of them right off the bat, just to focus all of our team, all of our resources on the 3 that we thought we could do well in the COVID era, and digitally, online, through WhatsApp, through Zoom, etc., through mobile phones. And we abandoned those other 4, and we added 1 back over time. But that ability for us to focus all of our resources, our declining resources, in areas that we knew would have the most value, I think was very essential.
What's your strategy to deal with the problem of learning loss that has happened due to the digital divide?
So the learning loss is quite real. And I think for us, we deal with the learning loss the way we would deal with the other forms of trauma, by focusing very intentionally on a set of strategies that start from the parent-child connection, and that build from there, and that incorporate those 6 C's that I mentioned. And so I think our strategy for education seemed to us very well suited for the issue of learning loss. But there's also a digital divide, as you say, and that presents a very significant challenge. And in our case, we have provided devices to some of our students that didn't have them. And for those that did have, basic mobile phone, we choose a technology, Zoom and WhatsApp, that WhatsApp at least so many people are familiar with in our migrant communities. They already have WhatsApp with their families back home. So we're meeting them in a place they're at with a technology they know how to use. Zoom is actually quite simple. After 1 or 2 sessions, they figure out how to use it. You don't have to have an account. You don't have to log in. So I think that's the digital divide. As a small NGO, there's only so much you can do. So our approach is to try to reduce the burden, reduce the barrier for people to enable them to access. We're privileged in some ways that our public school system distributed devices out to families. And so as we serve the parents of young children in school, many of those children now had a tablet that the parents could now use as well.
Yeah. What learning models do you use? Project-based learning or mobile learning, game-based learning? And what do you see as the primary benefits of that approach?
We use our literacy methodology is rooted in Orton Gilliam approach to phonics based learning, and we find that to be very effective. We use a system that's called Barton, that is kinesthetic, that again doesn't require the brain processing images on paper. Printed images on paper is the only modality for literacy. This one, you're actually manipulating pieces on a board to create the letters and to create the letter combinations of the words and sounding them out, etc. So it's very interactive, and that's a methodology that we like very much. We're looking forward to using your methodology, the methodology of Dr. Gandhi, with our students coming up, and the project-based learning is definitely a big asset in our work. Role play is very important because it gets to that 5th element of literacy, of use, and we think of our classrooms as a space for rehearsal. We're going to rehearse something for reality, and that rehearsal may be a scene in the doctor's office. It may be a scene at your child's school. It may be a scene with the public welfare office, or it may be a scene in the grocery store. But we find this notion of rehearsal to be a very powerful methodology, and it's related to that story voice action. So really modeling is really the key aspect in role play. But in role play, you have really an activation of voice, right? And that's the key thing, is activation. And we have many other routines and rituals of the classroom that we've identified to be very strategic. But these are some of the ones that come to mind right now.
Okay. So the last question, what are the best school or district resources that a parent should consider using as a family to support a child in the classroom?
Well, I think that the best approach for families, thinking on a global scale, there is such a massive variation of what resources might be available, and what the relationship between schools and families might look like. I think that's a huge variation in across places. And so the way that I think about that question is that the best way that parents and families can back their child's academic performance is actually in the home and is in the interactions they have with their child that may not appear to have anything to do with school. Probably better that they don't appear to have anything to do with school, and that are from the very beginning that are oriented towards supporting the child's curiosity, supporting the child's natural growth and development of their mind, of their curiosity, that help them acquire background knowledge, that follow their mind and add content to the curiosity. So if you're pointing over there and at the tree, that tree with green leaves adds the color green to the child's perception, adds the vocabulary leaves. They are already interested in the object. And many examples of this so-called scaffolding of vocabulary. If you take a word that your child is comfortable with and you add a synonym to it, or you add an antonym to it, and you visualize with your expression. And I think, again, it's a little bit of role play, a little bit of acting out. And so you can, without a book, without knowing how to read, you can teach your child a huge vocabulary, and vocabulary that's rooted in your culture, right? And that has meaning for your family, right? And that's, successful. I should have mentioned this earlier, I guess. Another big belief we have is that successful learning, sustainable learning, takes place in a domain that is meaningful for the learner, right? And so often, those of us who have been through formal schooling have followed somebody else's agenda. And it's a real testament to our ability as learners that we could do that because it wasn't of interest to us. There was no there was no payoff of any meaning for us other than we followed the rules and we got the good grade and we advanced to the next level. But the kind of learning that we would hope for is one that is rooted in one's culture, that is related to one's personal goals, that has meaning for each other. And the other thing I would say related to that, again, an insight that we have gained from the parents we work from, but also from science itself, the science of learning, is to really emphasize the primary language at home, really to emphasize the native language at home, even in the context of migration, where there's a big imperative and importance on learning the host country language or the host village language, if whatever it is, or the dominant language. These indigenous languages are so important for the transmission of culture, but also just strategically, parents will be able to express themselves better in their native language. They'll be able to express more emotion. They'll be able to express more sophisticated ideas in the native language. And what we know is that children who learn can learn any language. The issue is learning the language. The issue is learning the vocabulary, is matching the thoughts with the language. And there is a benefit that you give your child when your child learns more than one language at a time, or goes to school and learns a second language or a third language or a fourth language. There's a huge benefit from that multilingual capacity. They can learn math better. They can learn music better. They have more persistence in other academic fields. And so this primacy of the native language, I think, is really, really important. And it's an area that parents should rightfully feel pride in their home culture, their heritage, and that their children can learn and be effective and succeed in the world with that base, carry that culture forward, not drop it by the wayside to learn somebody else's language, the language of the imperial power, the language of the official situation. You may need to learn that, and you can, but having that base, I think, is a message that we have learned from parents how important that really is.
Thank you so much for sharing such wonderful views. And we really look forward to collaborate with you and learn more and more from you. Thank you for being with us today. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, audience, for patient listening. And again, thank you, Anthony, for being on the show. So this is Anupma Mahajan signing off. And Until then, next time, have a great day. Bye bye.